And answered.
Good Sunday morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for another edition of Flashpoint. Today, we're talking all about the election. Believe it or not, we're just 1 month away, and I have a fantastic panel to talk about what we can expect here in North Carolina as we lead up to Election Day. A brand new face here on the Flashpoint set. This is Dave Miranda, Communications Director for the North Carolina Democratic Party, all the way in from Raleigh. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Beth.
Also, not a stranger to the Flashpoint set, Scott Huffman, a professor of political science at Winthrop University, an expert political science professor. We appreciate you being here again, Scott. And of course, Brad Overcash, again, no stranger to our set. Thank you so much for being here, former chair of the Mecklenburg County GOP, current vice chair of the Gaston County GOP. Great to have you back on the show.
Great to be here.
Now, this has been, I think, one of the most fascinating election seasons in U.S. history. Fascinating being however you want to take that, good or bad. A lot going on here in North Carolina, especially. We are a very important state in this election cycle. Elon poll came out earlier this week, putting Attorney General Roy Cooper ahead of Governor McCrory in the governor's race, putting Hillary Clinton ahead by almost 6 points in the presidential race. That was coming out of the presidential debate. We just had the vice presidential debate this week. So much is happening, and one of the things we learned from this Elon poll, a lot of people don't split their ticket. They're voting straight party. So let's talk about what that means from the top all the way down this morning. Let's start with Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump here in North Carolina and what North Carolina means to this presidential race. And I'm going to start with you, Dave. Since this is your first time on the show, we're going to put you in the hot seat at the very beginning.
Thank you, Beth. Well, you know, with them at the top of the ticket, you know, that's going to drive turnout all the way down to the bottom of the ballot, right? How well they are able to pull out Democrats and Republicans and people to vote for the presidential candidate. It's going to impact those down ballot races. I think it's interesting that you see the bump in the polls that you've seen since the first presidential debate. I think a lot of folks saw Donald Trump for the first time and realized that he, you know, does lack the temperament, does lack the judgment to be president. You know, a lot of people, that was sort of their first exposure to Trump. You know, the first time they really sat down and paid attention, and they said, you know, I'm not so sure about this, right? And it's a critical state, especially for Trump. There's almost no path to victory for Trump without North Carolina, because of the way the electoral map is drawn, because of the way the country is, right? Mm-hmm. And whereas, you know, Hillary Clinton's been spending a lot of time here, of course, because they know that if we can win North Carolina for Hillary Clinton, that's the ball game. But of course, again, since that debate, you've seen gains for Hillary in some other key battleground states, including Pennsylvania and to a lesser extent Florida and Ohio. So I think, you know, the important thing is that a lot of folks really seeing both candidates side by side for the first time and came away sort of shaking their heads and saying, you know what, this guy Donald Trump clearly does not have what it takes. He's not the person that we want in control of our military forces or setting economic policy for the country.
Now, Scott, you've been studying these races. What will it take, in your expert opinion, for one of these candidates to take North Carolina? I mean, right now, this current poll has Hillary Clinton ahead by 6 points. How does she maintain that lead, or will she turn the state blue again for the presidential?
Well, you know, North Carolina is, for the past couple elections, has been the classic purple state. You know, Barack Obama won it in 2008 by, I believe, 0.4%, something really small. And then it swung to Romney. I want to go back to something you had mentioned earlier, and that is the straight ticket voting, because straight ticket voting, especially in the South, is relatively new. We, for decades, you know, from the middle of the 20th century on, saw a lot of split ticket voting, and it had to do with the partisan changes in the state and across the South. But it also had to do with a belief in divided government, the idea that if you had a president of one party, that it would be a good thing to have a Congress of another party to serve as a check on them. Mm-hmm. And that was true with especially a lot of voting during the Clinton era, and you saw the Republican take over Congress, and a lot of polls showed that people voted deliberately in favor of divided government. But as the federal government has become more and more polarized, and, you know, your viewers always need to be reminded, the people are really not as polarized as the leaders. We still have a moderate unimodal electorate. Most people are still closely divided, not deeply divided. But they have to choose between more and more deeply divided choices, and that's led to gridlock at the top. So people are beginning to shift back to that straight ticket voting, saying, well, clearly split ticket voting isn't solving any problem. As far as what it's going to take to win, Dave's right. Is everything. The problem is when you have two very unpopular candidates, and these are the most unfavorably viewed candidates that I can remember. Normally that drives turnout down. But this time, there's liable to be a boomerang effect. Sort of the Republicans saying, or the rank and file Republicans saying, well, I don't really like Donald Trump, but oh my gosh, I'm terrified of Hillary. And, Hillary is no Obama. She is not as exciting. She's not going to bring out the same, type of new excited voters that Obama did. But Hillary Clinton supporters saying, well, I kind of like Hillary, but I'm terrified of Trump. So there may be a boomerang effect, and that's going to serve both well. The truth about those swing voters in the middle is there's really not a lot of them. So a lot of people who tell pollsters, I'm an independent, but most people who say, I'm an independent, if you follow it up with, do you lean, a majority of them say, yes, I lean one way or another.
Do you feel a similar feeling that Scott just said, that some people, Republicans, might come out because they are just that terrified of Hillary Clinton as a possibility, and that Democrats come out just because they're that terrified of Donald Trump? Are you seeing that as you lead the Republican Party in Gaston County?
No, I think what we're seeing is an excitement on the GOP side like we haven't seen in a while.
Really?
There's an excitement not just for the top of the ticket, but all the way down. We're going to talk, I hope, a little bit today about our governor's race, and you put a poll up about that. If you look at what people really care about, and we call them kitchen table issues, we call them other issues, people really want to know who is going to put me in the best position so that I can have a job to provide for my family, who is going to allow for the best education for my children. And if you look at those types of issues, it's clear that Republican leadership in North Carolina has delivered on those fronts, and delivered in a big way that the other side hasn't been able to deliver on. And from a national ticket standpoint, I don't think we can discount the impact of the fact that the world is on fire right now, that the Islamic State is continuing unchecked, and that terrorism is not being combated with the strength that the American people expect. And so I think the Republican ticket from top to bottom has a lot to offer the people of North Carolina, and that's why I think we're going to be successful in November.
And I saw you jotting down some notes there, Dave. Do you want to jump in on that?
Well, I think it's interesting that you mentioned jobs, because, if you look at Donald Trump, here's a guy who we now know lost, $1 billion in 1 year, and then, gamed the tax system to avoid paying federal income taxes for 18 years. And people talk about him. He's running as a successful businessman and a job creator. And the more we learn about Donald Trump, the more we see that he's not a successful businessman. He's a successful con man, right? And at the state level, again, you talk about jobs, and, Pat McCrory talks about the Carolina comeback. WRAL just put out a poll that says 75% of people aren't feeling that Carolina comeback. So are some people doing better economically? Sure. But when you do what Pat McCrory has done and cut taxes for the very wealthy and raise taxes and fees on the rest of us in 67 different ways. There's a website, Pat Taxed That. You can see all 67 ways Pat McCrory raised taxes on the middle class. When you do that, you've got a Carolina comeback for some, but you're leaving behind a lot of people. And I also need to point out here that Pat McCrory's bill, HB 2, has cost thousands of jobs and has driven, according to Wired Magazine, almost $400 million out of North Carolina's economy. And of course, we were talking about basketball earlier, has chased the NCAA and the ACC away from North Carolina. And the damage to the state's reputation, who knows how long that will take to repair. Certainly the best thing we can do is to change the leadership, repeal that awful law, and really say North Carolina is still open for business. When you do things like that, it really chases employers away, and then that's not a good message to send to the rest of the country.
I know that you're ready to respond on that. I can see it. I'll let you do that right after the commercial break. We do have to take a